She never thought her wedding night would begin this way. A billionaire groom, forced by his powerful father to marry her. He hated the chains of this marriage. But on that night, one kiss changed his heart forever. Anthony Robert was a man who seemed to have everything. At 37, his name carried weight in every boardroom, and his fortune could buy him anything his heart desired. Yet behind the polished suits, the endless meetings, and the lavish lifestyle, there was a silence in his life, an emptiness money could never fill. He stood in his father's study, the old mahogany desk polished but untouched since the funeral. The lawyer's words still echoed in his mind, words that felt like chains tightening around his chest. Marry before your next birthday or you lose the estate. It wasn't just a condition. It was a demand from beyond the grave. The estate wasn't about wealth. It was his lifeline to the past. Those walls had held his mother's laughter, the garden carried her fragrance of roses, and the music room still whispered the echoes of his father's piano playing. To strangers, it was just property. To Anthony, it was the last piece of family he had left. He clenched his fists, pacing the room. His empire was untouchable. His investments, unshakable. But his heart was barren. Love was not a currency he traded in. He had no fiancée waiting in the shadows, no sweetheart dreaming of a ring. Romance had never survived in the cold, calculated world he built. Women had entered his life before, drawn to his money, dazzled by his power, but none had reached his heart. None had ever felt real. Anthony had stopped believing in love years ago. To him, it was a distraction, a story people told themselves. He had convinced himself that loneliness was safer than betrayal. But now, because of his father's will, he was forced to face the one thing he had avoided his entire life: marriage. Not for love, not for companionship, but for survival. As he stood by the tall window of the mansion, staring at the sprawling garden where his mother once sat with a book, his chest tightened. He couldn't imagine losing it. He couldn't imagine letting go of the only pieces of his parents still alive in that house. For the first time in years, Anthony felt cornered. The man who controlled everything suddenly found himself controlled by fate. "How do you marry without love?" he whispered to himself. The words tasted bitter. He knew the women in his circle, socialites who wanted his name, ambitious women who wanted his money, pretenders who wanted his empire. None of them would ever care for Anthony, the man. They only wanted Anthony, the billionaire. And so, the impossible task stood before him, to marry, not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. The weight of the will pressed on him like a curse. Nights grew longer, his thoughts darker. He walked through the empty halls of his mansion, every corner reminding him of what he stood to lose. His father's stern voice echoed in his memory. "Don't die alone, Anthony. Build a family." But how? Where would he even begin? It was at the charity dinner, weeks later, when his restless heart collided with fate. The ballroom was full of glittering gowns and clinking glasses, people laughing too loudly, conversations shallow as the champagne they drank. Anthony stood among them, detached, the loneliness inside him heavier than ever. And then, across the crowded room, he saw her. Caroline Kinsley. She wasn't there to shine. She wasn't dressed in jewels or draped in arrogance. She was simple, graceful, almost invisible to the crowd. Her soft brown hair fell against her shoulders as she carefully adjusted trays of glasses for the guests. Her eyes, quiet yet alive, carried no greed, no scheme. For the first time in years, Anthony's cold heart stirred. His gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. Something about her presence pulled at him, steady yet delicate, as if she didn't belong in the shallow world around her. He didn't know her story yet. He didn't know her struggles. All he knew was that she was different. And for a man who had stopped believing in love, Anthony Roberts' carefully built world shifted in that single moment. Caroline Kinsley never imagined her life would cross paths with someone like Anthony Robert. At 25, she lived quietly, almost invisibly, working small jobs to survive, often volunteering at charity events, not because she had much to give, but because kindness was the only wealth she carried. That night at the grand dinner, while women in glittering gowns laughed with glasses of champagne in their hands, Caroline walked softly between them in her plain dress, carrying trays, adjusting flowers, making sure everyone else shined. She wasn't part of their world, she was just a shadow in the background. And yet it was her that Anthony noticed. He watched her from across the room, her simple grace drawing him in. She wasn't trying to catch anyone's attention, but that very simplicity made her stand out. Her eyes carried warmth, not calculation. Her smile was small, almost shy, but it reached her soul. Anthony was a man used to masks. He had seen enough of society's fakeness to know when someone was pretending. But Caroline wasn't pretending. She was real, unpolished, untouched by greed. He didn't even realize when his steps carried him toward her. For a moment, she froze as the billionaire himself stopped in front of her. She looked up, unsure if she should bow her head or offer a greeting. But before she could say a word, Anthony's voice broke the silence. "Caroline, will you marry me?" The tray in her hands almost slipped. Her breath caught. For a second, she thought she had misheard. Her lips parted, confusion painting her face. "Excuse me?" she whispered. Anthony's eyes were steady, unshaken. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't drunken talk. This was a man who had built empires, asking a stranger the one question women dreamed of, but not with romance. With urgency, Caroline's heart raced. Why her? Out of all the women in the ballroom, why would a billionaire ask a girl like her, plain, ordinary, invisible? Seeing her stunned silence, Anthony leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I need a wife. It's not about love. It's about my father's will. If I don't marry, I lose everything he left behind." Caroline blinked, struggling to process his words. The estate, the inheritance, his desperation, it all sounded like something from a storybook. But the look in his eyes told her it was real. Still, she laughed nervously. "This can't be serious. You don't even know me." But Anthony's face didn't change. His jaw tightened, his eyes softened with something close to vulnerability. "I don't need time. I need honesty, and I can see it in you. You're not here for money. You're not here for fame. That's why I chose you." Caroline's chest tightened. Nobody had ever seen her that way before. To the world, she was invisible, but to him, she was suddenly visible. That night, long after the dinner ended, Caroline lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling. Anthony's words echoed in her mind. Marry him? The very idea was absurd. He was powerful, wealthy, untouchable. She was ordinary, burdened by debts, living day by day. Their worlds didn't fit. But then reality struck her. She had no family, no one waiting for her at home, no one to lean on when life grew heavy. Every day felt like a battle she was losing. And here was a man offering her security, a chance at safety, a chance at belonging, even if it wasn't for love. Her heart trembled at the thought. Could she step into a stranger's world? Could she tie her life to a man she barely knew? By morning, exhaustion filled her eyes, but so did determination. She thought of the bills piling on her desk, the loneliness that ate away at her nights, the fear of being forgotten in a world that never noticed her. And so, with a trembling breath, she whispered into the silence of her room the word that would change her life forever. Yes. At that moment, Caroline Kinsley, the invisible girl, agreed to become the bride of Anthony Robert, the billionaire who saw her when no one else did. And though she didn't know it yet, that single word would unravel a story filled with suspense, heartbreak, and a love deeper than either of them had ever believed possible. The wedding came faster than Caroline could believe. One moment, she was living in her tiny apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills and loneliness, and the next, She was standing in front of a mirror in a white dress she never dreamed she would wear. It wasn't a gown draped in jewels or stitched by world-famous designers. It was simple, soft, flowing gently around her figure. But when she caught her own reflection, her heart tightened. For the first time, she looked like a bride. Anthony's world moved differently. No grand announcements, no flashing cameras, no golden stage. The ceremony was held in a quiet hall, the air filled with the faint scent of lilies, the only decoration Caroline had asked for. There were only a handful of people present, the priest, 2 witnesses, and a silence heavy enough to press on Caroline's chest. She wasn't marrying for love. She wasn't marrying for dreams. She was marrying because life had cornered her. And yet, as she walked down the short aisle, her steps trembling, her eyes lifted and locked with Anthony's. He stood in a black suit, tall and composed, his face unreadable. To anyone watching, he looked like a man fully in control, but behind his steady gaze, his thoughts churned. This isn't love. This isn't forever. This is duty. Still, when Caroline came to stand beside him, something inside him shifted. She looked fragile, yet strong, afraid, yet determined. Her hands shook slightly as she held the small bouquet, but her chin lifted with quiet dignity. The priest's voice filled the silence. The vows were spoken, words that carried the weight of eternity, yet felt strangely hollow between them. Caroline repeated them softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Anthony's deep voice followed, steady, almost cold, but his eyes never left hers. When the priest said, "You may now kiss the bride," the air froze. Caroline's heart pounded. She had never been kissed in such a way before, not in front of others, not in a moment so binding. Anthony hesitated only for a breath, then leaned forward. His lips brushed hers gently, carefully, as though afraid to shatter something delicate. It wasn't passion. It wasn't fire. It was restraint. A promise. A promise that though this marriage wasn't born of love, he would honor it. A silent vow that he would protect her, at least in name. The kiss lasted only a moment, but for Caroline, it felt like the world had stopped. Her heart raced, her breath caught, her knees weakened beneath her dress. She had just become the wife of Anthony Robert, the man everyone in the city admired and feared, yet she felt like she was stepping into an unknown storm. When the ceremony ended, the witnesses clapped politely. There was no music, no cheers, no dancing. Just 2 strangers bound by paper, law, and circumstance. Anthony offered her his arm as they left the hall. She slipped her hand through, her fingers trembling against his sleeve. He felt the shake, but said nothing. In the car back to the mansion, silence hung heavy between them. Caroline stared out the window, her bouquet resting in her lap, while Anthony sat with his hands clasped, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't put into words. He had done it. The will's condition was fulfilled. The estate was safe. But why did he feel no victory? Why, when he glanced at the young woman beside him, did he feel something shift in his chest? Caroline clutched the bouquet tighter. She wasn't just someone's wife now. She was his wife. And though the marriage had no love, no romance, no fairy tale beginning, her heart whispered with fear and wonder. What if love could grow from this? What if a marriage that began as nothing more than survival could one day become something real? And so, in that quiet hall, with that restrained kiss, a story began. Not of passion at first sight, but of 2 lonely souls tied together by circumstance, destined to discover what it truly meant to belong. The night had fallen heavy over the mansion, its silence spreading through the grand halls, wrapping every corner with stillness. Caroline stood in the bedroom doorway, her white gown trailing behind her like a soft whisper. Her hands trembled as she touched the frame, unsure whether to step in or stay hidden. The room felt too large, too silent, too filled with possibilities she could not name. Anthony entered quietly. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly disheveled from the long day. but his eyes, dark searching, rested only on her. Neither spoke at first. The distance between them felt like miles, though only a few steps lay in the way. Caroline lowered her eyes, her heart beating so hard she thought it might shatter the silence itself. Anthony's voice came low, gentle, like a secret shared in the night. "Caroline," he whispered, "I know this marriage began as an arrangement, but tonight you are my wife. I won't force you into anything. I only want honesty between us." Her lips parted, but her voice almost broke with fear. "Anthony, I've never been with anyone before." The billionaire froze. Her words struck him like lightning. She was untouched, innocent, entrusting him with something no wealth could ever buy. For a long moment, he simply stared, the weight of her confession sinking into his chest. Then slowly, he stepped closer. His hand rose, hesitant yet steady, lifting her chin until their eyes met. Her gaze glistened with uncertainty, but also trust. Trust that he would not break her. Anthony leaned down, his lips brushing hers in the faintest kiss. Not duty, not ritual, but something real. The kiss deepened, tender yet trembling, as though both were afraid of losing the moment. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close against the strength of his chest. For the first time in years, Anthony felt warmth crack through the walls of his guarded heart. Caroline's hands found his shoulders, clutching him, her heartbeat racing wild under his touch. It was not desire that bound them, but discovery. A billionaire who had everything except love, and a young woman who had nothing but her heart to give. That night, in the silence of the mansion, they both found something new. The beginning of trust, the beginning of something deeper than either had dared to hope. The morning light spilled into the grand bedroom, and for the first time in years, Anthony did not wake alone. He turned his head, watching Caroline's soft breathing as she lay beside him. Something stirred in his chest, something he had buried long ago. He rose quietly, afraid to break the fragile peace, but her eyes fluttered open. She smiled, a shy, uncertain smile that made his world tilt. From that morning, everything began to shift. Anthony, once a man of steel and silence, found himself wanting to share pieces of his hidden world with her. He showed her the piano in the West Wing, polished but untouched for years, the same piano his father used to play when he was a boy. Caroline touched the keys with wonder, letting her fingers glide over the ivory. She pressed one note, and the sound echoed through the empty halls. He stood beside her, listening, and for the first time in a decade, music returned to his home. He led her into the gardens his late mother once adored, where roses bloomed despite years of neglect. Caroline bent down, inhaling their fragrance, her eyes sparkling. "They're beautiful," she whispered. Anthony watched her, realizing she wasn't talking only about the flowers. The mansion, once a cold fortress, began to breathe again. The walls echoed not with silence, but with Caroline's laughter. She filled the spaces with warmth no amount of wealth had ever bought him. At night, they would sit by the fire, talking until the flames dwindled. Anthony told her about the loneliness that haunted him, about the betrayals that hardened his soul. Caroline listened, her eyes soft, her hand resting gently over his. In return, she shared her fears of never belonging, of being too ordinary in a world that judged her for her simplicity. He looked at her then, his voice low but firm. "You are more extraordinary than anyone I've ever known." Sometimes they fell silent, but the silence was no longer heavy. It was safe. It was a silence filled with trust. Each kiss they shared after that first night no longer belonged to duty or arrangement. It was choice. It was hunger. It was healing. One evening, rain tapped gently against the glass windows as Caroline leaned against Anthony's shoulder. He turned, brushing her damp hair from her face, and kissed her softly. This time, she kissed him back without hesitation, her heart unafraid. Another night, under the starlit balcony, he cupped her face and kissed her as though he were afraid she might vanish with the dawn. She clung to him, whispering, "I'm not leaving, Anthony." Not ever. With every moment, the walls around his heart cracked piece by piece until he realized he didn't just need her in his house. He needed her in his life. The seasons had changed since the day Caroline entered the mansion as a bride bound by duty. What once felt like a cage now carried the warmth of laughter, shared meals, and whispered secrets in the moonlight. Anthony had changed too. The cold, untouchable man everyone feared was no longer the same. He smiled more. He listened. And sometimes he even laughed like a boy rediscovering joy. But one evening, as the sun painted the gardens in gold, Anthony found himself standing alone beneath the old oak tree his mother had once loved. His chest ached with something he could no longer ignore. He realized the truth. The estate didn't matter. The wealth didn't matter. The name, the contracts, the endless expectations of society, none of it mattered. What mattered was the woman inside the house, the one who had walked into his life with courage when she had every reason to run. The one who looked at him, not as a millionaire, not as a master of a grand estate, but as a man, flawed and yearning for love. Caroline. That night, he invited her into the garden where memories of his family lingered in every petal and breeze. Lanterns glowed softly around them, casting halos of warm light. Caroline wore a simple white dress, nothing like the gowns she had been forced to wear at society dinners. Her hair was loose, and in her eyes, Anthony saw the kind of peace he had never known. His heart pounded. He had faced boardrooms filled with enemies. He had faced storms of scandal and greed, but nothing made him tremble like kneeling before the woman who had taught him what love truly meant. With shaky hands, Anthony went down on one knee. The same spot where his mother used to sit with a book now became the place where he would surrender his pride. "Caroline," his voice broke, raw and unpolished, "I married you for the wrong reasons. I wanted to protect what was left of my family's empire. I thought love was weakness, and I thought duty was enough. But I was wrong." Tears blurred Caroline's eyes. Her lips parted, but no words came. Anthony continued, his chest rising with each breath. "Tonight, I don't stand before you as a man of wealth or power. I stand as a man in love. I ask you, not as part of a contract, not as part of a deal, but as the only dream I've ever had that feels real. Be my wife. Truly. Forever." The silence stretched. The wind carried the soft fragrance of roses, and the lanterns flickered like stars around them. Caroline's tears spilled over her cheeks. For a moment, Anthony feared she would walk away, that his late confession had come too late. But then she stepped forward. Her trembling hand touched his cheek, and in her whisper was a promise that healed every scar in his soul. "Yes," she breathed, her voice breaking. "Yes, Anthony, not for duty, not for contracts, but because I love you too." In that moment, his world shifted. He rose, pulling her into his arms as if letting her go would mean losing everything. Their kiss was not rushed, not desperate. It was steady, full of gratitude, full of truth. The mansion that once echoed with emptiness now stood as witness to a love story that defied its cold walls. That night under the stars, two hearts once bound by obligation broke free into destiny. And those who once whispered cruelly about the contract marriage were silenced, not by arguments, but by the sight of a man and woman who chose love above pride, wealth, and fear. It was more than a marriage. It was a lesson to everyone who judged without knowing, a lesson to a society that valued power over people, a lesson that love, true love, did not ask for bloodlines, wealth, or status. It asked only for two hearts willing to fight for each other. And on that night, in the garden of the old estate, Anthony and Caroline sealed theirs, forever,